Well, the first 2 days of this week, we've been talking about getting involved in something that's not profitable. And the first and most obvious example is getting involved in an immoral or adulterous relationship. In other words, being in a physical relationship that is not blessed by God, cannot be blessed by God. One of the things I often try to advise people when they're contemplating, getting a divorce or leaving their husband or wife or things of that nature, I just simply say, do you understand that nothing good can come out of this? There's no way that God can bless this. It's kind of like we tell a lie because we think it will benefit us, or even as Paul said to the Romans, that what advantage is there if I lie to further the gospel? He said, why am I still judged? Because God won't bless anything that's not of him. Lying is not of God. Unfaithfulness is not of God. Any kind of untruthfulness, and that's what marital unfaithfulness is. It's untruthfulness. You have to begin by believing a lie and then telling a lie and then committing a sin. And so it's really, really important that we understand that we bring our minds into the captivity of Christ. And that's why he said when you're dealing with these kind of temptations, the first thing you need to know is don't turn aside to them, stay on the path of righteousness and truth, and don't go near those temptations, because nothing good can ever come from them. And that's where he said you'll give the best of your strength to things that don't deserve them. And what happens when I give my best strength? Well, I become weakened in my life. I don't have the same power and vitality and energy and focus that I had before. And that's what I've seen with people. When I see people getting distracted, or even in myself, if I feel like I'm getting distracted by the cares and affairs, the deceitfulness of riches and the pleasure and things of this world that Jesus referred to as the weeds that grow up in the garden of our soul and choke out the vitality of the Spirit of God in my life. When I do that, I try to stop back and say, okay, when did I take my eyes off the prize of the high calling? When did I lose sight of what really matters? And it's really important because immediately you can say, Father, forgive me for that. I ask you to cleanse me of it and free me of it and get me going again in the right path. Now, I'd like to say that's all it takes. It doesn't take going back and trying to pretend like something didn't happen, or going back and trying to remake the moment or recreate the moment or whatever the thought you might have. What we really need to do is just realize that what is done, and I can't really do anything except I'm sorry and say, God, help me not to do that again. That's called repentance. It's a change of mind where I look at something that I thought was a benefit to me, and I realize now that it wasn't a benefit. It was actually something that was harmful. And that's really what the whole concept of repentance is all about. It literally means, the Greek word that's used there literally means to think something over again, to see it in a different light, to rethink what you once believed to be true and realizing it's not true, and embracing something that you may have previously thought was untrue as being actually the truth. That's kind of called the conversion experience, isn't it? It's not so horrible. It's not so difficult or bad as we often say. But not only does he say that you will lose that momentum in your life, but you'll also, he said, you'll lose years. And that's why I want to talk about what he says next about wasted years. He says you'll give years to the one who is cruel. You'll give up years of your life to things that are cruel. And particularly when we talk about marital unfaithfulness, what are you creating? Well, first and foremost, you're creating a relationship that is not going to be a peaceful one. The trust that you may have had with the person that you married or the people that you were working with will suddenly be gone. It's kind of that issue. I realize that if a man is unfaithful to his wife or a wife is unfaithful to her husband, their kids immediately conclude, if my parent can't trust the other parent, can I trust the other parent? In other words, you begin to create this fracture in the trust structure of your family, your home, and your life. And trust is one of the most valuable things we have. And when we first get married, we kind of have trust on deposit. It's kind of like an inheritance that the spouse that you're marrying is entrusting you to be good and true and loving. And if you don't feel that way, that you can trust the person you're marrying, you shouldn't marry them in the first place. Because that's why we have marital vows. Vows are talking about keeping a trust, I'm going to be trustworthy in this relationship. You can count on me not to do intentionally anything that will harm or damage this relationship. But once you do that, you really create a dynamic within any relationship, whether it's a very personal relationship like marriage, or a relationship between children and their parents, or parents and their children, or a relationship even by co-workers and fellow church members and so forth, that when we fall into hurtful lusts and shameful behaviors, or just doing things that are wrong, the trust is destroyed, and suddenly the relationship becomes fractured. And it may still survive, but it isn't what it was before, and it takes a lot of time to rebuild it. If you have violated somebody's trust, don't be so insensitive that you demand that they immediately trust you again. Nobody's wired that way, and nobody should be required to do that. Now, I've had people say to me, well, you should forgive. And that's true. We should forgive. But you see, forgiving doesn't mean that we forget. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people think forgiveness is. I forgive you what you do. I'm not going to devalue or reject you because of what you did, but I also can't forget what happened. And until I see that there's a change of behavior, there's a new trajectory, that there's a recognition of the wrongness of what you did, and you've chosen a new direction, that I will still keep that in my memory bank as a reference point. And I will be watching for failure on your part, not because I want you to fail, but I will be speaking into your life saying, this is an area where you struggle, and let's make sure that when we see you moving in that direction, that you don't do that. It's kind of like somebody, say, for example, who is an alcoholic, and I see them standing outside of a bar. I'm going to go up to them and say, is this just happenstance? Did you just happen to be here? Or is there a reason why you're standing here? Are you wrestling with whether or not you're going to go in there? It doesn't mean I don't forgive them for their past misbehaviors, but it means that I don't forget the fact that this is an area of incredible vulnerability. And this is, I think, one of the big areas we find in many relationships today is the issue of pornography. It's so accessible, so available, and it can be done so secretively through the internet and through our digital world, that many times we kind of just assume that people aren't going to have a problem with it. And the problem is, especially for men, because we are so visual, it's something you better put some guards up around your life, and you better have an accountability network in your life. And I would simply say that we should never assume that somebody doesn't struggle with it. There are just things that you need to avoid at all costs. And that's why I think it really is that if you have somebody in your life, you have a husband or wife or a friend who has struggled with this, then this is something that you shouldn't be afraid to address with them. In other words, if they've struggled with pornography, then you shouldn't be afraid to saying, so how is it going in that area of your life? I'm not judging you for it. I'm not condemning you. I'm not devaluing for it. I just want to know, do we need to pray? Do I need to pray harder for you to help you really kind of stay strong and firm? And to let that person know, if at any time you're beginning to struggle with this, with a substance abuse or sexual immorality or anything of that nature, anytime just lying and cheating and stealing or gambling, there's just so many things that we can get caught up in, that we say to them, if you're really beginning to struggle, please do me the favor of giving me a call and let's talk. Let's get together. Let me walk you through this, or walk you away from the ledge. And so, again, we need to realize that doesn't mean you haven't forgiven the person. But you realize that once we become captured by certain behaviors, in the old King James, in the Hebrew, in the book of Hebrews, it's called besetting sins. Those things that are habituated in our life. We all have them when we came to Christ. And when you're struggling against that, or you know somebody who struggles with that, then don't be afraid to challenge it, because we know that once they go down that road, they're going to be brought under the cruel domination of that addiction. I had a pastor say to me one time, he said, I tell my people, don't ever offer me a glass of wine or beer or anything like that when I come to visit you at your home, because if I take one drink, I'll wake up 3 weeks later in Montana and not know how I got here. In other words, he said, I am ferociously addicted to substances. So I don't even want to pretend that I can mess around with that. I can't just have one and move on. And so you need to understand that when you have people in your life who have a variety of things that we can become addicted, not just substance abuse, but other things, that we need to be forward about that and say, I know that you've repented. I know that God's forgiven you. Are you struggling with that? And have you fallen back into that again? And that's not unkind or unloving. In fact, that's the kind of insertion into other people's lives that shows that you love them and you care about them, because you know how damaging and destructive these things. The years will become cruel, that you'll be faced with scandal and divorce and broken relationships, a loss of reputation, emotional burnout. There's so many consequences. And so it's really important. Solomon really understood this, because I think he had become victimized by these very things he's warning his son about. And he understood the cruelty of them and how ultimately they brought great destruction into his life and into his very kingdom. So here's a guy who's warning us from his own palette of experiences. He got the palette filled with all the colors of bad ideas. And he's saying to his son, don't use these colors to paint your life. Find ones that are clean and pure, right and just, and avoid these at all cost. We'll continue tomorrow. Blessings.